Welcome to another episode of Arbitration Life. I am Janette Brin.
And I'm Hana, Doumal.
The one chance we have. The pandemic gave the world a golden opportunity to fix the climate crisis. We're about to waste it. So I was browsing this CNN.com article, and that was the headline that caught my attention. COVID-19 has devastated the global economy and forced governments around the world to pour trillions into recovery efforts. But as the article highlights, the pandemic could have been the decisive moment in the fight against climate change, and it sounds like we might be blowing the opportunity.
It's an interesting topic indeed, and as I did hear, many researchers reported that lockdown measures observed during the COVID-19 pandemic had shown a considerable impact on environment in various countries, and a positive one. And the impact that climate change has and continues to have on the world can be a scary thought, but one that globally we cannot afford to ignore.
Indeed. In the field of climate change and finance, today's guest acts as global coordinating counsel to various major corporates in relation to climate change, transition, disclosure, reporting, compliance, and investment. So she just may have a thing or two to say about climate change. Currently at 20 Essex Chambers, she's a specialist in international arbitration and dispute resolution with a focus on private and public international law. She regularly advises investors and states in respect of climate-related fiscal transition and litigation risks. She works closely with a number of states in relation to climate transition regulatory structures to mobilize, finance, and formulate climate investment policy. Working closely with the International Chamber of Commerce, she has represented it at the conferences of the parties on climate since 2015. And no stranger to the BVI International Arbitration Center, having served as our most recent guest lecturer at our biannual conference. I'm speaking of none other than Wendy Miles QC.
Welcome to Arbitration Life, Wendy.
Hi.
So Wendy, at the top of the interview, we were talking about a news headline that started off by saying, the one chance we have, suggesting that the pandemic gave the world a chance to fix climate crisis, and we essentially are wasting it. What are your thoughts on that? Are we wasting an opportunity?
Do you know, I don't think we are. And the reason I say that is because I think the world's moving quite dramatically in the right direction, but it's not going to transform overnight. So insofar as we thought the pandemic would transform behavior and reset it forever, that wasn't a realistic expectation. Our economies can't cope with that. The poverty, you know, all of the implications of that don't bear thinking about. Transition to a decarbonized economy, a decarbonized future is a process, and it takes time. We don't have a lot of time. We've got a really critical interim target at 2030. That's 9 years. And we've got another target at 2050, critical. That's another 20 years. It wasn't going to happen in 12 months. And you can't just switch the button off our entire global energy system, our industry system, our supply chains. You know, look at what happened when we switched off one boat on the Suez Canal. So these transformative things don't happen overnight. They are slow. We'd all like them to be faster. But I think the answer is, Hana and Francois, is that we, Hana, is that we, and Janette, we, the answer is we are moving in the right direction. Governments are moving in the right direction, private sector's moving in the right direction. Finally, I think lawyers are moving in the right direction. And so we just have to keep going, get more and more and more progressive, more and more ambitious.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And could you please tell us now more about your transition from working in a big international law firm to joining 20 Essex Chambers? What was that experience like?
It wasn't because of COVID. So I moved at the end of July, right? End of July 2021. So I left my dining room converted to my home office the evening of my last day at Debevoise, and the following Monday walked back into my converted dining room home office on a different email. Because a lot of my existing matters and work and clients just transitioned with me, and I still work with most of the people I was working with before. It hasn't been as eventful a transition as it might otherwise have been. But to be fair, transition to working from home, transition to not working in an office, to not commuting into the city and not being in an office, that's been interesting, difficult. I've enjoyed it in some parts and loathed it in other parts, but I think just like everybody else. So I don't know, I've still got my transition to chambers to come.
Okay, well, I hope you'll get to go physically there soon.
We've been decorating my office, so I'm looking forward to seeing it.
That's great.
So, Wendy, why did you choose arbitration? Or would you say that arbitration chose you?
It very much chose me. It very much chose me. So you need to remember, of course, that I grew up as a lawyer. I trained and qualified and started in New Zealand in the early 90s, mid-90s. So at New Zealand, arbitration in the mid-90s was really only domestic construction work. It was more engineering, sort of really typical construction type work. And I was a commercial litigator. So it wasn't something I really paid a whole lot of attention to. I left New Zealand to work in international dispute resolution. And I didn't actually identify, as I made that decision and that move, that would necessitate a move into international arbitration, international commercial treaty arbitration. So I sort of stepped into international dispute resolution in London, and it was in the arbitration world. So yeah, it chose me, I think it's fair to say.
Nice.
Wendy, you wrote multiple articles on climate change related disputes, and you are advising investors and states in respect of climate related physical transition and litigation risk. This is clearly a very important topic. So could you please tell us more about your work in this area?
So this is where we opened, and obviously transition to a decarbonized future is fundamental. It's critical. We have to get there. And when you transition the global energy, industrial infrastructure and land use systems from a carbonized system, which we're in now, to a decarbonized system, you basically transform every single aspect of that system: how we work, how we travel, how we eat, what we eat, how we work, how we use the lights, every decision we make. And one of the things that we're finding is that because it's a system and the system is interrelated, it's critically important that you don't try to solve the transition challenges in a vacuum, that you actually look at how they interconnect with one another. So the UNFCCC is developing with private sector right now some sector transition pathways. And those sector transition pathways look at the interrelationships between all of the stakeholders and actors, the suppliers, the service suppliers, the goods suppliers, in each of those systems. And what's been overlooked, I think, is the role of lawyers as system, as stakeholders in that system, and as providers of instruments and tools that hold those relationships together. And of course, I'm talking about contracts. And we've come to think of in the climate and what lawyers can do context as these contracts and the commercial relationships as the connective tissue for those systems that need to transition. So if you can get the connective tissue working to facilitate transition, you can actually get quite dramatic directional change. So that's something that we're looking at. And from my point of view as a dispute resolution lawyer, is what happens when those contracts reach dispute phase? Do we have to look at if the objective of the commercial relationships and the contracts has changed because we're looking at moving business towards transition? If the underlying contractual objectives change, then doesn't the manner in which we interpret and apply those contracts in a dispute also need to match that shifting objective? And that's what I'm really interested in looking at as international dispute resolution lawyers. Are we up to date? Are we on message? Are we understanding the transition that the underlying clients are making and that their business and industry generally is making? And are we going to be able to uphold those objectives when it comes to enforcing those contracts? And, you know, we're untested, so we'll see.
All right. So Wendy, earlier you would have mentioned that you felt that governments are moving in the right direction and doing the right things. When you came to BVI though in 2019 for our annual conference, it was on the heels of Hurricane Irma and Maria. And so I wanted to ask you, what are some of the things that Caribbean countries should be doing, or perhaps more of what they should be doing? Give me some insight on what we in the Caribbean need to be doing to tackle the issue of climate change.
Right. It's governments are moving in the right direction. I'm not sure governments are doing all the right things.
Okay.
And I don't think they're moving in the right direction fast enough.
Okay.
And the whole fact that private sector is actually stepping in and accelerating transition tells me that governments could indeed move faster. But the specific question, the first answer to that, I think, is states and territories in the Caribbean shouldn't focus only on adaptation and resilience.
Okay.
In terms of critical path, that's obviously critical path, right? You need to protect the territory. You need to protect the environment, the territory, the way of life. But I think it would be a lost opportunity, especially for the BVI and a few other states. I think it would be a lost opportunity not also to get actively involved in the climate mitigation side as well. So climate adaptation is as it sounds. It's about building resilience, building seawalls, raising land, raising ports and jetties and things to make sure that when you have issues like more extreme weather events, rising temperatures and rising sea levels, for example, and loss of biodiversity, that you have counters in place to deal with that. So it might be something as simple as air-conditioned buildings with rising rising air temperatures. So that's adaptation. That's obviously critical. You can't ignore that. And resilience is associated to adaptation. So long-term, how you build your buildings today have to be able to cope long-term with very, very different external climate and weather concerns. But mitigation is about reducing greenhouse gases. And I always liked the opportunity, and this is what we spoke about a couple of years ago, and it feels like last week because we've lost 18 months since we were there talking about this. But I always thought as an international financial centre that the BVI and some of the other territories in the Caribbean had a real opportunity to be thought leaders when it comes to green finance. And mitigation is about reducing greenhouse gases. The role of finance in mitigation is to try to direct where funds go into activity that promotes and accelerates decarbonisation and move funds away from high carbon activities. It doesn't mean moving away from a particular industry, but what it means is moving towards types of projects and investment that are much lower carbon. So if it's a carbon creating activity, that there's some form of either carbon capture or set off or similar. So you're focusing on the carbon. And what we're seeing is London is really focusing on this right now in the lead up to COP. But what we're seeing is a focus in the financial institutions of what they call financing green, which is funding those mitigation projects, but also greening finance, which is turning the way you regulate and run your financial center or your financial system, turning that into one that aligns with, across the board, aligns with climate mitigation goals. So rather than having issued 10% of your investment portfolio in green bonds, you green your entire investment practices across your institution or across your state or across your regulatory system. And that can be achieved through policies, through contracts, but also through regulation and legislation. So I think my message would be absolutely you have to focus on the critical path, which is adaptation and shoring things up. But don't miss an opportunity, especially the BVI, for being, real market leaders in terms of climate mitigation as well, and benefiting from the opportunity that transition to a new type of business, a new way of doing business, benefiting from that, as well as just being recipient.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting. Yeah.
Great insight. And I really hope that we can do some things to drive more of that type of conversation here and in other regions as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, just let me add to that. One of the areas that really is underexplored, and there's bits of it happening in the Caribbean, is in relation to insurance.
Okay.
So insurance is obviously a commercial business. It's a very profitable business, but it's a business that really has to transform to deal with climate transition risk, physical risk, and potential mitigation risk. And so, when you're at the absolute front line of that, there's been a lot of sort of use of sort of the notion of regional insurance funds that are partly funded by state money, partly funded by development money, and partly funded by private insurer money. And it's those mixed public-private partnership models around insurance to cover first loss that I think can be really, really innovative game changers for ensuring that people have the proper coverage at an affordable price.
Yeah, that's a big one indeed, because I think that was a major wake-up call for us after Irma, when there was so much devastation and insurance became a big deal. How do we recover?
That's right.
So thank you for that, Wendy.
Now, Wendy, what has been the most gratifying moment of your career?
I struggle to answer that, and I find myself thinking, am I struggling to answer that because I haven't had it yet, or because I've had so many?
That's great answer.
Right, so I'm not sure if I haven't had it or if I've had so many, but two, so gratifying. There is a personality type that ends up in the type of law that I do, and it's called neurotic workaholic.
Oh, we know them too.
Right?
Not here, but previous experiences.
Right. So it's this perpetual journey of seeking gratification through your work, but never quite feeling you've reached it. Mm-hmm. So if I may, let me flip it slightly to what I identify as key instrumental moments in my career, and I call them hinge moments, because they're moments that I can pinpoint that changed my direction and really determined the path as it's been. And one of them, and so in a way they're gratifying, right? So I'll give you two that really came to mind when you asked that. One is getting offered a job by Gary Bourne at Wilmer Cutler Pickering, as it then was, in 1999. That for me was, first of all, arriving from New Zealand in London, realizing that I'd just been offered a job, by one of the gurus of international arbitration, what was a really little team still then, at this amazing American law firm, which had this huge commitment to public service and pro bono and policy. And they used to talk in those days about the intersect of business law and policy. And that, for me, when I moved to London without a job, so we traveled for a year, worked for an NGO in India for 6 months, sort of stepping off the boat in London, as so many international arbitration lawyers do, stepping off the plane somewhere that's not your home, and you just leave it a little bit to luck and chance and hoping all the work you've done before will get you there. So getting that job, both at the time and now in retrospect, is an extremely important hinge moment and gratifying. And then the other, I guess, is reaching the point, and it's sort of the flip side of that coin, reaching the point in my journey, both in terms of, just financial security, age, reaching the point where I could then step away from the structure of an international law firm and really step into doing the type of work that I really, really want to do, away from any of the pressures of, sort of law firm partner, profit targets, KPIs and things. And I've been terribly spoiled. I mean, Wilmer had that public service focus. Boyce Schiller, I was allowed to build what I wanted to build. And Debevoise has an extremely strong public service focus as well. So I was very spoiled with the firms I was in to be able to do the things I cared about, but to be able to focus entirely on the things I care about, that I think has realizing I was at that point in my career where I could step away, was pretty extraordinary.
Wow. Well, I think, Wendy, a lot of people will identify with the first moment that you described, and then the second, I think a lot are looking forward to, because it's quite amazing that you're able now just to focus on all the cases that you want to work on. So that's great.
Very lucky. I remember David Williams, who's a very, very renowned New Zealand international arbitration lawyer. And I remember walking next to him not long after I started at Wilmer, so in the late 90s, walking back to Essex Court Chambers with him, possibly when he took silk in the UK, which was much after he took silk in New Zealand. And I said to him, "You just have the perfect life." And he said, "I'm a very lucky boy." And I feel like, you know, at the time I thought, gosh, imagine that. And I think I'm just starting to get a little bit of a feel for that. And it's great. This is the beauty of this career. It's such a long career. It has so many chapters and so many twists and turns in the chapters, but it's just so deeply, deeply fulfilling at every single step of it. So, you know, we're all pretty lucky.
Thank you for this, Wendy. And I think a lot of more junior arbitration practitioners will, you know, learn more about this, because I feel like sometimes in one's career, you just want to know where you're going, but you have also to appreciate every step and know that at some point you will be able to do what you want.
Right.
Wendy, sorry, not to cut you. I wanted to get this question in because I know we're running short on time. In addition to the field of climate change, you are also involved in numerous industry sectors, one of which is pharmaceuticals. With all the controversy surrounding COVID vaccines, I was curious to hear from you your thoughts on the potential number of litigation matters, and could arbitration be the answer to that?
Yes, you know, I still think arbitration can be the answer to everything. Arbitration and mediation / conciliation, but only because it's a very, very flexible mechanism and you can make it what you want. But what's so fascinating about the COVID sort of comparable to climate is the vaccine, obviously the inequality in the distribution of the vaccine has been a real issue, and the inequality of the effects of climate change, but also the adaptation transition in respect of climate change is going to be something we're going to have to grapple with. And there's a key factor that affects both, which creates a really nice comparable, and that's technology. So the distribution of the COVID vaccine to less developed states, a lot of the barriers to distribution weren't in getting the vaccine out there, but in getting the technology. It's a technology that's expensive, it's the licensing that's expensive. And some of the vaccine companies said they wouldn't enforce their IP if others manufactured the vaccine in breach of the patents and the protections. But we need to find a way better to distribute climate-related technology as well as vaccine-related technologies, because pandemics are now our present and our future. This is not going to go away. And we need to find a way to get that technology fairly distributed globally, developed and less developed countries. But we can't do it by forcing the innovators of the technology to give it away for free. So the innovators of the technology will be private sector. States aren't going to develop this technology. They may provide some public money towards it, but it's primarily going to be private sector, and we have to keep facilitating and encouraging that. And even the universities really operate more in a private sector type way in that context. And what we need to do is get some form of licensing technology sharing agreement that can be constructed around a fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory pricing structure that doesn't chill innovation, but also ensures proper distribution of the technology globally. And there are precedents for this in things like mobile phone technology, and all of those licensing agreements are subject to dispute resolution clauses, usually arbitration, some form of expert determination, and then arbitration. And I really think the innovative way that arbitration is used around those fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory sort of FRAND pricing formulas, I really think there's a way to develop that more in relation to vaccine technology, but also in relation to climate technology, particularly in interconnected technology like smart cars, for example. It's one thing to build the car, but you need the infrastructure for the charging.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a lot of really, really valuable lessons to be learned, and there's some really exciting projects underway there. But I think on the technology side, that's the lesson we can learn from arbitration, I think, on COVID. Incidentally, the Pfizer contracts have international arbitration. The AstraZeneca one with Europe didn't, but the Pfizer ones do. So FYI, yeah.
Interesting, yeah, definitely. Now, Wendy, what is the most important piece of advice you have learned as an arbitration lawyer?
Most important, probably, it's not necessarily as an arbitration lawyer, but just as a lawyer and as a human being. Stop and reflect. And this is the beauty of the last 18 months, right?
Absolutely.
It's been an enforced stop and reflection period. Because even though lawyers' hours are off the charts and everybody's as busy as ever, without the noise of going into an office and being with people and commuting all of the time, I think there is more reflection time. And I think as arbitrator, as counsel, as client advisor, as mother, as wife, I as friend, as mentor, I think all of that, just stop and reflect. Our minds move so fast, and we have things thrown at us so much all of the time. I think stopping and reflecting, I think, is probably the most valuable, constant lesson that I'm sort of taking and working on.
So then what does Wendy Miles QC do for fun and relaxation?
You see, that's really unfair to ask me that in the middle of COVID, because
what were you used to do then? Sorry.
I used to do. So we have and this I know does discredit my climate credentials, such as they are, but we have a beach house in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. On the beach where I grew up, the beach where we went for our summer holidays when I was growing up. And of course, New Zealand summer holidays are Christmas. So we try to spend every Christmas there with our family and our bigger group of friends and family. And we have some friends come from the UK and the US, but we also have all of our friends. My husband's New Zealander as well. Mm-hmm. And it's that time, just friends, family, beach, don't laugh, the surfboards. My teenage sons find that hilarious. At 50, I should try.
I want to try to learn to surf. I mean, we can here. I should learn to paddle first, I guess. But.
Surfing is brilliant. I heard, I was told something wonderful about surfing by a woman who I was mentoring, and she was having something she was working through with work, and I said it's actually these types of challenges, either with a client on a matter, on a case, or with your, you know, in your employment situation, whatever it is, that build our problem-solving skills and our resilience as lawyers. And she said to me, you know, it's interesting. I was learning to surf in Cornwall, which would be so cold, but I was learning to surf in Cornwall. And she said, I was getting really, really upset with the waves because they kept hitting me and you know, it was having to paddle out over the waves. And I just found it so soul destroying. And she said, and I expressed it to my surf instructor. And he said to me, the waves are the point. And we were talking about this in the context of just challenges in your career, be it a really difficult case or a difficult relationship issue. And, you know, this isn't an easy career. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be so fulfilling. But it's the challenges that make it so fulfilling. So I think surfing is, in a way, a metaphor for so many of our careers. And, you know, and I think women's waves are sometimes a bit bigger. So surfing is actually a very raw way to viscerally to feel that. And you know, I'm only on my knees after 3 years trying, so I'm no surfer. But I don't think there is a place in the world I laugh harder and more than when I'm out with my younger son in particular trying to surf.
Excellent.
That's wonderful. Thank you for this beautiful metaphor. And you should definitely try again.
I love it. I'm thinking about all the waves that I'm going through every day too.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm getting over them somehow, over them or through them.
Yeah, exactly. That's all you need to do. Do you paddle though?
Surf.
Do you paddle?
Paddle boarding. Do you know I've never done it? I've never done it.
All right. So next time you're in BVI, we'll all go and give it a try.
Yeah, definitely. It's nice. I'm starting doing it. It's really nice.
That would be amazing. I'm not sure that would be amazing. In New Zealand, the water's too rough where we are. But no, that'd be brilliant. Yes, let's promise to one another.
Yes,
wonderful.
Indeed. So Wendy, I want to thank you because I know you're a very busy lady and we totally appreciate you making time for us today, sharing some great knowledge, insight on some very important matters going on in the world. So we can't thank you enough. But before we let you go, we're curious to know, are you team Suits or team How to Get Away with Murder?
You haven't seen any of those?
No.
It's okay.
She's totally lost.
I don't watch television.
Oh my goodness!
Do you watch Netflix?
You don't watch Netflix?
Ever?
I don't.
Have you heard about, so you haven't heard about Suits or?
I've heard about Suits because she married one of our princes, but
that's as far as it goes.
I'm afraid, but yeah, no. Can you give me, but I used to watch TV. Could you
That's funny.
something around the Ally McBeal era?
That's a good show, actually.
Nice.
Okay.
That's funny. We got you on that one. Yeah.
How to Get Away with Murder? What? I haven't even heard of that. What is that?
How to Get Away with Murder?
Yeah.
It's one of the most popular legal shows on TV. On Netflix.
Yeah, it's an American TV show, basically showing a law professor who's also a criminal lawyer, life and very eventful life.
Yeah.
And it's criminal law.
A criminal lawyer, yes.
Yeah, who's also involved in a few crimes.
I did watch The Good Wife.
Okay,
that's a good one. That's a good one. Yes.
Yeah, I did watch that over one holiday. I just back-to-backed it, and I quite enjoyed that. Just the first series. I got a bit bored with it by the second series. But no. Give me a book question.
Thank you so much, Wendy. It was indeed a pleasure to have you on Arbitration Life today, dropping so much knowledge and insight. We can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much, Wendy. That was so interesting. All this conversation about climate change and so nice to hear more about your experience.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much, Hannah and Janette. I really, really enjoyed it. And it's a pleasure, even virtually, to feel like I've spent a little bit of the afternoon back in the BVI. And I hope to do it in person, offsetting my carbon footprint
Yeah.
for too long.
All right. See you soon.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching another episode of Arbitration Life. We really hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did. And we're very grateful to Wendy Miles QC for taking the time out of her busy schedule to talk to us today here on Arbitration Life.
For more Arbitration Life, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Arbitration Life.
Arbitration Life is sponsored by the British Virgin Islands International Arbitration Centre, meeting the rapidly evolving dispute resolution needs of arbitration users worldwide. The BVI IAC is a neutral, impartial, efficient, and reliable dispute resolution institution and conference center located in the Caribbean, Latin America, and at the crossroads of the Americas. For more information, visit bviiac.org.